Hey, welcome back to the Ace Football Academy. This is the Friday Footy Talk for March 14th. Coach, I'm always looking at that date because I never remember what's going on here.
Yeah.
It's the benefit of not having to work on Fridays, Coach.
Yeah,
But you got to wake up early in the
lucky for
morning.
you.
Coach, last week we discussed setting up an individual practice.
Correct.
What we're looking at, formats, things we're looking at the setup. We're going to continue that conversation today. We have more input to throw into this that we'd like to send out to our audience. There's so many details in individual practice that each coach needs to pay attention to, not just while they're in practice, but setting up the practice for that day or for that week. Some even set it for a whole season. It just depends on how the coach organizes their team for at that point in time. So I'm going to kick it over to you. You again, as we talked about last week, are taking your C license course and you're learning all kinds of great stuff.
Yeah.
One of the things that they're kind of throwing at you is terminology and ways of formats, practices. So what is the new, I guess, language that's being used to set up practices, whether it be particular format, a practice-to-practice situation, but what are you learning so far this season here?
So, we go back to the D license, and granted, I took my D license several years ago, so I'm sure that course is revamped as well. But, we were taught with the play, practice, play scenario, right? So kids show up, you play for a little bit, then you do your practice and whatever you want to work on, and then you should end with, some sort of play, some sort of scrimmage or anything like that. They haven't necessarily gone, from what I can tell, they haven't necessarily gone away from that. You still hear play, practice, play. But now what they're kind of doing in the C license is, they're ultimately calling it a warm-up, activity 1, activity 2, activity 3. So you can spin those activities however you want, but what they've kind of started to lean us towards are three types of training. You have the non-game form, right? So these are the drills that have really nothing to do with the game. So you think passing lines, think shooting drills, kind of things like that, right? So there's no game format to it.
Well, let me ask you this. When they're talking about the non-game format, are they also including conditioning, strength training, speed training, or is that completely separate?
Completely separate and very rarely talked about.
Okay.
Very seldom talked about
Right.
in those. And as well as, and again, we've talked about this in the past, as well as like the strict, purposeful technical training, right? It's not discussed.
Okay.
Whether you should be doing it, whether you shouldn't be doing it, whether you should be doing it within your warm up or whatever it is, like it's not discussed, right? So non-game are your passing lines, your shooting drills, whatever, those types of things that ultimately you aren't going to see within the game. Then you can move to the next type of training you have is the modified game format. Modified game form is basically we're playing the game, but as the coach, I've changed the rules a little bit.
I feel like this kind of goes back to the old school form of small-sided game.
Correct. And really, that's what it is. So, right,
Yeah.
Maybe I've changed the game because we're playing kick-ins instead of throw-ins.
Yeah.
Maybe I've changed the game because I'm playing a 4-goal game, or I have a neutral, or whatever. But you're doing something that isn't natural to the actual game. And so that's kind of where they want you to live nowadays is in that modified game. They want kids playing. They know you have to do certain things to keep them, that's what kids want to do, right? We talked about this. When they show up to training, they don't want to sit in passing lines. They want to play. So I think for most coaches, whether they know it or not, that's where we're living. We're living in that modified game form. And then, of course, the game form is exactly that. You are playing the game. You're playing the rules of soccer, whether it's 7v7 or 8v8, depending on what kind of numbers you have. But there are no restrictions. There are no constraints. You are just lined up and playing the match.
Well, and like I said before, we're just changing the language to kind of
That's
what
all they're
we've
doing.
been doing.
Yeah.
And I get it. There's always, you could call it, we're progressing in different ways as we go into the future, different ways of people seeing things, perceiving their training sessions. So going back to your format here, when they're discussing the non-game form or the modified game form, are they also giving examples of what these look like? Is that changing as well as far as what the specific training drill that you're doing in those formats?
No, not much is changing. Kind of just what you hinted at. What's changing is the terminology, what we're calling it, right? And again, not that when I was in our in person a couple weeks ago, I used the term play, practice, play, right? And nobody was like, "Oh no, we don't do that anymore." It was just like, "Oh yeah." So, but that modified game form is, to me, part of your play, right? That is a play portion of training. Um, the game, for me, for my sessions, and maybe this isn't what everybody does, but ultimately, my session is modified game form, typically a non-game form, and then game form, right? I get, my players show up and we get playing. At least once I start training, again, I mentioned last week, I open with some sort of technical session pretty much every time. But once we get playing, I'm in that modified game form. We're usually just because we're playing kick-ins, right? So I want everybody with the ball at their feet, things like that. But sometimes we'll play a 4-goal game. Sometimes we'll play a game where you can score on either goal, right? So it's just about the number of passes and then go score. So do lots of different things in that modified game form. But to me, that is just your first play. Then the practice, or what I'm calling now the train, is that non-game form. Okay, it's going to be the passing sequence that I want to really harp on this session. And so we're going to run it as a passing line drill, right? And those aren't frowned upon. It's always, and this is a conversation for another day, but it always kind of challenges my thinking when, you go to these things and nobody wants to talk about doing technical training. And technical training should be happening within the game, but then we're okay with putting them in passing lines. Right. To me, those things are the same, right?
Yeah.
But in the grand scheme of things, to them, it's not. They're drastically different. So I don't understand that difference. But to answer your question, yeah, I think it's just mostly we're just changing the terminology, and it's activity 1, activity 2, activity 3. And as a coach, you kind of get free reign to decide: am I going to run a non-game form, modified game form? Game form? Am I going to run a modified game, non-game, and an actual game? That's kind of up to your freedom.
So last week and this week, you and I both have talked about what our format is, whether it be just like you explained here, or you do a certain warm up, you go into a rondo, and then a small side of game, and then you start playing. And if coaches are listening to us and they're saying, all right, I got to have a practice set up where I have all these formats going down, then you're going to have in the back of your head, well, when am I working on my corner kicks? When am I working on my free kicks? Is that no longer a part of my practices? When does that get implemented into my practices, and how do I do that where it's not interrupting this style of format here?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think you came. I think you came on in a previous episode and said you don't work on corner kicks. You don't work on set pieces for the most part.
Well, to go back, I work on defending corner kicks. I work on defending free kicks. And then I work on some of that stuff after practice.
Right.
Now, I'm not saying we should never work on that.
Right.
But I think a majority of it, I'm working on the training.
So for me, I guess the answer. So for me, like my training is this week, and actually I'm going to record one tomorrow for the C license course. We're working on building out of the back. I'm a big build out of the back guy. For a lot of reasons, but one of them being that right now I only have 2, maybe 3 girls that can actually clear a ball or actually like kick a goal. Like, so you mentioned corner kicks. I'm going to switch it to goal kicks, right?
Oh yeah.
So I only have one or two girls that can take a goal kick and actually clear that line that I need them to clear, right?
It's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a huge deal.
And so, most of the time when we try to clear that line, what happens? It goes right to that center mid or right to that
Never
wing, and
fails.
it's just standing there, right? But so for me, we're building out of the back, and I guess this doesn't. So I guess we're not technically working on corner kicks, but in my modified game form this week, we're starting every possession from the corner or from the goal kick spot, right? So whether the offense scores, whether the defense scores, when we restart, when the ball goes out, when we restart, we are restarting from that goal kick position. And okay, now what's it going to look like? So that's kind of how I do it. I kind of work it into my plan, but I've kind of gone to your way of thinking, where in the past I did draw up these, fun gadgety corner kick plays, right? They never work and they're never run correctly. So for me, I'm just like, all right, everybody go stand about the PK spot and crash the goal. Somebody get something on it, right?
Yeah. Well, I think where I'm at on this, and the reason why I don't work on a lot of corner kicks, and I think you alluded to this, do I have a player that can even get it there?
Yeah.
That's number one. If you don't have a player that can even get it to the first post,
yeah,
why are we working on corner kicks? You should be working on just kicking the ball as a cross as a technical style of training. And that's my number one thing. The second thing is we have the no head rule up until I think U11, U12. You've got kids that are just terrified to head the ball because they've never had to work on it. I mean, I just been working with an 09 girls team, and I might have had one girl who I could legitimately say, well, go head the ball on a cross. And, that's another issue. You can't try to make something happen that they're struggling with. That has to be developed. You've got to work on those trainings before you start working on expanding on corner kicks and things like that. Just like you said, we work on goal kicks. And is my goalie even going to get past that first line?
Yeah.
Well, if she can't, you can't just have her do it in the game anyway,
right,
and give the ball right to the other team. There has to be a development phase first, and then you can implement that into the game sessions.
Yeah. And I agree, right? And so after our match on Sunday, one of my players came up to me, and this is where my practice plan from this, we talk about pride, and you're going to get into your weekly versus single day and things like that in just a second. I had a player approach me after our game on Sunday, and say, Coach, we got to do something with our goal kicks. We got to work, right? Mm-hmm. So they see it too.
Yeah.
And so that's when you start to build those things in. But you're right. A lot of it is just a development process. Right now, most of my girls are not strong enough to clear that front line on a goal kick, and so you have to have other ways around it. And then, so I think where you started here with corner kicks and free kicks and goal kicks, I think it's just a matter of what does your modified game form look like? Where are you going to start the ball, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that's how you can kind of work those things in there, right? So maybe we're just working on transitions, but I'm going to start from a corner, right? The opposing team is going to have a corner. How do we transition out of a corner? So you do little things like that does adds those things into your practice, into your training.
Yeah, absolutely, Coach. Let's move on to another area what you just alluded to. We're talking about individual practices. But what about preparing for the week compared to what we're doing right now, a single individual practice, or even a season-long game plan? I think a lot of this has to do with age-specific. I think at the academy level, and this is just my opinion, at the academy level, this should be a season-long plan.
Agreed.
Because this is strictly about developing them. You've got to work on their first touch, their technique on passing, mm-hmm. their technique on crossing, their technique on everything has got to be implemented. It can't be, we struggled on this and that game, so we got to change everything we're doing and go work on this. Well, stick to your game plan.
Right.
Because their development is what's priority at the academy level. And then I think once you get up into maybe the collegiate level or maybe even the pro level, where you're really implementing an attacking strategy, I think that enables you to have a season-long game plan of, all right, we're working on this first quarter of the season, and we're going to strengthen on the second quarter of the season, and what it may be. But I think when you get into like your 9-year-olds through, let's just say high school, I think it's, for me at least, it was a week-to-week basis of, hey, I like where we're here. I want to keep improving that. Or, man, last 3 games we have struggled mightily on swinging around the back or just defending in general, wherever it may be. Now we're looking at game film, and now I'm using the game film to plan my weekly sessions.
So funny you bring that up because that's what the C license course has been all about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Making those observations that lead into what is my next week going to look like, right? And so what I like about that is, I'm lucky enough to have access to game film, right? I have a camera, so, and I know not a lot of coaches have that, but I do think we're getting to that time in our lives where most of us, most players, most coaches, especially at my level, have one, or have access to one. Maybe not every game, but a lot of matches. And how many times, Coach, have you walked off the field and like, oh my gosh, we were so bad today? Whether you win or lose or draw, right? You're like, oh, we were so bad today. So then you get home, you give it a little bit, and then you watch the game film, and you're like, actually, it wasn't all that bad. Like we had a couple moments where I'm thinking, what the heck are we doing?
1 or 2 mistakes turned into big mistakes,
right?
And that's what stood out.
Yeah, and so making those objective observations. And here's the thing that you have to do. And for me, this is what I'm learning in the C license. This is where, for me, the C license, where my biggest struggle has been coming in. Is so let's like last week or at the tournament I played a couple weeks ago, we could not progress the ball into the attacking third, right? We could not. We were okay in the middle third. We actually built out a little bit pretty well. Again, we were playing some really, really solid teams, and that had something to do with it as well. But we could not break that final line, right? We could not get into our final third to set us up for a chance to score a goal. So my sessions were my next Tuesday and Friday session were built around, okay, breaking that final line, right? But so then you go into the game on Saturday, when we play on Saturday, and like, okay, I'm going to observe, make tally marks, make tick marks every time we are successfully able to break into the attacking third to create a chance on goal, right? But then what happens. The game starts, and you're like, oh, crap, I haven't made a single tally, and we've already scored a goal, and we've already taken some chances, and so now all of a sudden it's all gone, right? And so that's where I'm really struggling as a coach in the C license, is finding that observable data. Again, I'm lucky enough to have a video, but that is not where everyone is lucky enough. But I do think as you start to get into middle school and definitely high school, your sessions have to become weekly, and your assessment is the next week's game, right? Okay, we spent 90 minutes 2 times this week focusing on breaking the final third, right? How do we do on Saturday? Oh, we did really well. Okay, well, what did we not do well? So now my training sessions changes based on the last match. So I agree with you 100%. At those younger ages, it should be season long, and they should not be built around results. Okay? I think we're both on the same page there. I guess the questions we're going to get, and I don't know the answer to this, is, okay, well, when does that change? Does it change at 9v9? Does it change when you go to 11v11? When does that flip? And so, okay, now it is going to be a little more results based. And I think that just depends on, for me, that just depends on your team. Right? Do you have a highly competitive team that clearly wants to win and clearly wants to take the next steps? Okay, well then now maybe we're going to become results, not based, but results oriented a little quicker. Versus, am I a team that is in Division 4 and we're mediocre in Division 4.
Yeah.
So then maybe I'm not so focused on my wins and losses, and I am still in that season-long development.
Coach, let's move on to another area where we have given plenty of input on how we set up our training sessions. The next part, I think this is so important that coaches get in the habit of doing this. It's writing down your training session.
Oh, yeah.
One of the things that I learned going through my coaching courses that I did was them focusing on writing down your training session with notes. And there's a couple of reasons for this. Number one, it sets your plan for either that day or even that week. And you don't have to keep it all in your head. There are so many times on the field, and I'll pull that paper out of my pocket and like, oh yeah, that's what I want to make sure I emphasize on today's training session.
And you're just like, hey, girls, give me a second. And like, I don't think there's anything wrong with going, okay. Or they're getting water. You're like, okay, what am I doing next?
Exactly. And one of the things you and I want to emphasize in this discussion right here is when you're writing out your training sessions, you should have coaching points. It could be this training session, I'm going to focus on first touch. I'm going to focus on field vision, and I'm going to focus on limiting their touches. And I'm going to explain that to them while I'm giving instructions on what that training drill is going to be. And so now it's in their head, oh, I need to work on those 3 things when I'm doing this drill. So now they're focused on that. And it's important that we don't expand too far where they have 10 things in their head. Yep. They're just going to forget all of it.
Yeah, and so this goes back to our week-long, season-long, like, how am I planning, right? When one of the things that we are getting in our C license course that we are getting just grilled upon, right, is that if I make a session about breaking the final line, right, breaking into the attacking third, during that session, if I go over to my defense or if I coach the defensive side of the ball, like, we get marked off for that, right? Your session plan is built around the offense, the attacking team getting in, and that back line, that is for your assistant coach, or that is for another day for those of us that don't have assistant coaches, right? That's for another day. And so coaching points are so important because they help you stay on that path as well. What am I focused on today? Hey, I just spent 4 minutes yelling at my center back because of her placement or whatever, but really my session had nothing to do with my center back today, right? So coaching points are so important. I will tell you there is a U.S. soccer development framework. It is broken down for every single age group from U4 all the way up to U23. So that's where those coaching points come from, right? You decide as a coach, okay, what am I working on this week? And again, I keep going back to what we're doing, building out of the back, escaping pressure. You can go and it will give you, hey, here are the things that your players should be doing in these moments. So it's not something that coaches need to feel like they have to recreate or come up with themselves. It's all there for you. You just got to go and download it, find it, and look for it. But having those that just keep you, as you mentioned, your mind goes 100 different places throughout the day and even within the hour and a half training session you get. So having those written down helps drive your focus. I love that you mentioned having key words, right? Key things that you want to get through to the players. And when you look at it, breaking that final line, it has like 9 things written down. You can't give a player all 9 of those.
No.
You have to say, okay, what are the 2, maybe 3 that, okay, we really have to get, okay, we need to exploit the space, we need to lose our mark, and, whatever else it is, right? So those are what I'm going to hit on the entire 90-minute session. So when at the end of the session, I'm like, all right, what do we do tonight? They're like, well, good grief, coach, you mentioned exploit the space 9 billion times, right? Or you mentioned diagonal run 9 billion times, right? And so then not only has it hitting home with them, but this is a great way for you as a coach to reflect, did I achieve my training session goal? Or are my players able to regurgitate to me what we worked on that night?
And I'm glad they brought that up because it's about not just having them focus on those key points while they're training. We're also teaching them the terminology that's going to be important in their soccer IQ as they get older. Because just like you did at the end of your practice, sometimes I'll do that at the end of that training session, but I'm definitely doing that in future practices. Hey, what are we looking at in this drill that we've done 2 or 3 times already?
Yeah.
Hey, Bob, give me one thing I want to see from you in this training session. First touch, coach. Yes, absolutely. Hey, Sarah, what's a second thing I want you to focus on? Communication. Yes, absolutely. So we're getting them to process information, not just while they're playing, but for them to start calculating, okay, this is what I need to be doing, not just in training, I want them in games now.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we're building terminology in their brains. We're building that understanding. We're asking open-ended questions, not a point where we're answering it for them. We need to develop their critical thinking and problem-solving skills in those training sessions. And so we're asking them over and over and over as the season goes on. So now they're answering the questions before I even have to say anything. And so we're building that soccer IQ for them.
I'm going to expand on that just for a second before you close tonight. You mentioned communication, right? I don't know what it's like for you, but in my huddles, I'm a big communicator guy. And so when I ask a question, a lot of times the first thing they'll just yell is like, communication, right? Because they don't know. So what I'm learned is, sure, communication can be the right answer, but then it's like, okay, show me how you need to communicate.
Yeah, great point.
What needs to be? Yeah, you're right. I do need you to communicate. But is it, hey, how was your day? That's communicating, right? Or is it, hey, Chris, I need you to make that diagonal run into the space so I can play that ball to you, right? Now you're not giving them, sure, you're acknowledging, hey, you're right, we have to communicate. But what does that communication look like?
I love that you just brought that up because we don't want them to start saying, hey, I'm open. Hey, I'm open. Square, drop, through, wide, whatever that may be, as well as...
What about boot it?
Boot it. As well as communicating with their teammates in games. Hey, that defender is pinched inside all day. Get me out wide as soon as you get that first touch and get it to me quick.
Yep.
It's problem solving and resolving issues during the game or your training sessions. That's the other part of that communication that you're digging into. So when you're asking them the open-ended questions and they're getting that response of correct answers, now you also got to say, hey, did you see Sarah White out there? Oh, no, I didn't, Coach. Okay, let's focus on that now. What are you seeing? I shouldn't have to point things out to you in the training sessions. You've got to start reading and reacting to what you see there.
So, and going along with that, not only can you do that with the communication. So I ran a session the other night where, we came back in. We were actually doing, it was my modified game form, right, to open the session, and we were just playing possession. And it's easy, it's quick, they get the ball moving, it should get them talking a little bit. So I brought them in after they played for 5 minutes, and I said, okay, kind of what you mentioned. Here's our focus tonight. Here's what you're going to, I try to say very little in that first play session for me. Very little. Then in that second, so I do a 5 minute, or 10 minute, whatever it is. And then I bring them in and we talk about, hey, here's our focus tonight. And here are the 3 words you're going to hear me say. But one of the things, again, to go with that, how do you communicate? What does that look like? I said, okay, when we gain possession of the ball, what has to happen? Of course, they're all like, oh, we have to find space. And so then I can look at you and go, okay, green, there's the field. Go show me what space looks like. Go and, space is correct. But now they may know the correct answer, but can they do it? Can they execute it? So now, okay, green, you just won the ball. Here, Chris, you just won the ball. Teammates, show me what we should look like as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
And so, boom, and then I should have wingers at the touchline. I should have one striker checking, one striker being an option long. I should have a drop. All those things come into play. Again, forcing that, okay, you got the correct answer. You are right. But sometimes we give them an easy way out because we stop there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But sometimes they're also just giving us the answers that This is probably what Coach wants because he never shuts up about it. Right? Coach does not ever stop talking about us communicating.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to say communication and we can move on. Right? Okay. So I'm learning, right? Great. Yes, I want you to communicate. What does that look like? Show me what that looks like.
Folks, so much goes into planning your training sessions. So many details getting in there. If you've got questions for us, please hit us up on Facebook.
Absolutely.
We would love to respond to any issues you're dealing with. We are the Ace Football Academy. This has been your Friday Footy Talk. I'm Coach Dunham. This is Coach Hamilton. Go kick some ace.